What have you seen in terms of people moving into recurring giving?
When people see themselves in the story or see their role in the story, that's when people are moved to do something consistently. When people are guilted into something, they're more likely to give one time or to join and then cancel. But when they see themselves in the story or their role in the story, I think they're moved to say, you know what, this is something I want as part of my giving DNA.
Brian Seay, welcome to the Sustainable Giving Podcast.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
We are so glad to have you. We're going to have a conversation today that I've been looking forward to since you and I first had a chance to gather in person at this wonderful place called the Experience Lab. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But you've been involved with really kind of cultivating, I would call it live experiences. I don't know what you would call it. Really inspiring people to move from awareness to action for years. So today, our conversation, I think, is going to be super fun. Just thinking about how do we not just move people emotionally, but into sustained long-term generosity.
Yeah.
So thanks for joining us. Talk a little bit about your background, and then let's dive into what is the Experience Lab.
Yeah, so my background, I mean, really the last 2 decades plus, I have spent in the live event space, but around nonprofit fundraising. So how do you take a live event space and unpack a story that has the ability to move people to action? And so I did that for almost 2 decades at Compassion International, whether it be concerts or events or festivals or any kind of live event experience where we would take the story of the work and put it into that event. And so that could be just pure audio, but it is also experiential ways to do that on the concourse and visually in the space. So have really dedicated the last 2 decades of my life of how to unpack that, how to move people to action in those moments that, especially if they weren't expecting it. I think that's a fun way to think through that is they weren't expecting to be moved, but were moved nonetheless.
So that's fascinating. So 2 decades, live experiences. We're going to dig into when they didn't expect it because I think there's a common thread there. But now you've joined
Yeah.
this organization called Charity Water. Many of our listeners will be familiar with Charity Water. What does Charity Water have to do with live in-person experiences?
Yeah. So, like so many people, I've followed the Charity Water story for all 20 of its years. So, this is a Charity Water's 20th anniversary this year. And Charity Water from day one was so good at the creative storytelling, innovation side of the nonprofit work, whether it be fundraising or just simply storytelling. And so, uh, the next innovation for Charity Water is the Experience Lab, which opened. We just turned 1 year old 2 days ago. So we are 1 year in existence. And the experiment really is what does it look like to put a 60-minute guided tour of the water crisis using technology and immersive storytelling? What would it look like to put that in a brick and mortar space and invite people to come to us in a digital world where we are constantly battling for people's attention to watch my video, click on my link, respond to my email? This is somewhat old school in the way that we've set it up, in that to experience this, you have to drive, check in, come through the space, and then give us 60 minutes. And what we have found is people long for that connection. It's easy to get digital in this world. It is hard to get face-to-face personal connection. And so we've invited people into the Experience Lab. We're just outside of Nashville, Tennessee, in Franklin, which is one of the suburbs, in a multi-use retail space. So we put it in, it's called the Factory at Franklin. It's 50,000 people a month that come through here. They may have shown up for ice cream, but they end up in our space because they're drawn up the stairs to something that looks unique and looks engaging and inviting. And then our role is to guide them through the space in a way that we immerse them in the story of the water crisis. And so that has been a fun challenge over the last year, but it's been really exciting to see transformation happen face to face, in person with people that choose to go through the space.
Yeah, we had a chance to host a group of leaders in the experience lab, which was so cool. Thank you for doing that. And it was fellow nonprofit leaders, right? And it's thinking about innovation and how to get outside of your space, pun intended.
Yeah.
And what does it look like to think differently, to see differently? And it was just so cool getting to walk through that. So, by the way, for our listeners, we'll put some images if you're watching the video of this feed. We'll put some images of that time together. But one of the things you talked about when we were together is, and I think this is helpful regardless of whether it's a physical space, an event, a live experience, or another just piece of communication. You talked about this very specific order. And I want you to talk through this space in this, in this order that you really
Yeah.
taught us, this idea of going problem, solution to action. So walk us through the thinking behind that flow and then why that order matters so much.
Yeah, so I mean, it is intentional for us. It's sequential in that what we're finding is about 60% of the people that come through our doors have no context of the water crisis. So if you start in the middle of the story or two-thirds of the way through the story, you may not connect with them in a way that they need to be connected with. You may not tell the story in a way that resonates with them. So we made a very intentional decision early on, one, that it's a guided space only. It is not, it looks like a museum meets Adventure Science Center, but it's not a walk around space. It's a guided
Okay.
tour. There's a guide that's going to walk you through the space. And so for people, we felt like to understand it well, we needed to unpack the problem first. What is the problem? What are we trying to solve? And then once we've unpacked that problem, how do we solve it? So we go to the solution. We talk to them about how not only charity water solves it, but the water sector in general solves the water crisis around the world, and it is a solvable crisis. We know where people, all the people live. We know all the solutions that need to exist to do it, and so we walk them through the solution. And then, as we get to the end of the experience, we invite people into action. We're an education space first. Because in any level of fundraising, if somebody is not educated, they're not going to give. So we're education first. But as we walk them through that level of education and problem and solution, then we invite them into the movement, invite them to act upon what they've learned. And so we have a whole section where we talk about how they can do that. So problem, solution, action for us is a very intentional way that we set it up, very intentional way that we tell that story, and hopefully a way that impacts people significantly as they go through each of those stages.
So paint a kind of a picture for the folks that are listening and haven't had a chance to see some of the pictures. Just give us a little bit of a picture of kind of, maybe illustrate some of those. And you mentioned even just starting back with like drawing people up the stairs, like because if you haven't been,
Yeah.
Franklin, Tennessee, the factory, by the way, highly recommend it. Very popular spot. Very cool, kind of like indoor. I don't wanna call it a mall because it's way better than that. Just super high-end space. You wanna go, you wanna spend hours there, and you guys are just centrally located, beautiful 2nd floor, but on a balcony overlooking this space, and so you cannot miss your space. So just give us a quick kind of visual tour.
Yeah, so, I mean, we literally are located inside an old Dutch oven factory that they have renovated into this multi-use retail space, and the Experience Lab sits on a mezzanine 2nd floor overlooking what we would call the Grand Hall. So there are restaurants and shops below us, but the main entrance to the entire factory exists right below us. And so as people look up, as they're grabbing their ice cream or donuts or barbecue, as people look up, they see the Experience Lab, all glass along the front. Part of that is a glass wall that runs a video about the Experience Lab. Like you said, Dave, you literally cannot miss it. Like if you look up, you are seeing it over and over again. And so once they come up the stairs, one of the great things about and what I really love as a dad and a grandfather, I love to watch kids come up the stairs and get enthralled with our front door. And our front door is a lot more interesting than my front door or your front door. It is all glass, and behind that are what we call proto boxes. They're holographic technology, and they serve as somewhat of a billboard for what we're doing, but they are life size holographic images of people that we have met in northwestern Uganda. And specifically, it is the family that will be the center point of the story throughout the lab. They are the thread that runs throughout the lab. We tell the story of one family, and they are there in the boxes, not still pictures. They are moving video holographic images that enthrall people as they walk up. And we are cleaning that glass multiple times a
Mhm.
day because kids come up and are pressed up against it, which I love to see that. And so
Yeah.
many times those kids end up pulling their parents up the stairs. They end up inside the experience lab and end up on one of our tours. And so we are intentionally trying to draw people up as a front door, not only to our space, but to the
And
story.
I can attest, having stood there, and especially the kind of final room of the space, and you looking down and just all these kids with ice
Yeah.
cream, just like looking longingly up at the second space. Which, if you'd have said there'd be like a water based museum like experience, that sounds like so much fun. But it's like the kids are like the first ones that are like, I want to go see
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, and as they come through, I tell people all the time, one of the genius parts of the experience lab is we can do a third grade field trip in the morning, and then I can do a CEO major donor tour in the afternoon, and the space does not have to be flipped. The story gets told a little bit differently. The challenge, the ask gets presented differently, but the space is still the same because you enter in those front doors, then everybody goes into a theater to watch a video about the water crisis. It's a surround sound theater. The screen is 10 feet tall. It is somewhat all encompassing. As you learn a lot of times for people, the first thing they've ever learned about the water crisis, but then they exit out of there and they do some pretty incredible immersive experiences. So the next one for us would be one of the two things that gets talked about the most, and it's entering into a small room in the experience lab that is 95 degrees and has a built-in treadmill in it. And all of a sudden, you walk into this dark, hot room, and you've walked out of Franklin, Tennessee, and into Uganda. And the video starts rolling, and it's a 180-degree video of Esther, who's one of the daughters of the family that we focus on, walking for water and focusing on the idea of how long it takes for people to walk for dirty water every day. And so the goal in that room is simply to walk with her. And you follow her for 7 minutes from her water source to her home while walking on a treadmill carrying a 40-pound jerry can of water. Like you go from eating your ice cream to within 10 minutes, you are
Yeah.
walking through
You are
Uganda.
literally
And
walking a mile in someone else's shoes, and yeah,
correct.
it's incredible. And, I'll add, even just from a scent perspective, right? You're just like, "Wow, I'm in Uganda." It's really, really well done.
Yeah, so multi-sensory, like there are essential oils that smell like dirt that we pipe in there every day. And it's the goal is not to ever, as you would talk about, I'm sure on any fundraising level, is never do we want to be manipulative? Never do we want to take people on a journey that puts them in a space that they might respond, but not do so in a place of true movement. And so for us, it is all about honoring the story of this one family and telling it in a way that honors them. And I believe we do that well, but I also believe that we go as far as we can go in grabbing all of the senses and engaging them so people do fully try to grasp what we're fighting against.
Well, and to that point, I remember sitting in a meeting many, many years ago. You spent some time with Compassion. I've worked a little bit with Compassion. I've also worked with World Vision, and one of the creative directors at World Vision, Brian, years ago, said to me something that's always stuck with me. And he said, "Our job is not to over dramatize the truth or to under dramatize the truth. Our job is to hold up a mirror." And I think what
Yeah.
you've done in this space is you're holding up a mirror. This is literally Esther's walking path. You get to walk that distance in her shoes. Um, but it's also doing so in a multi-sensory way. It's not just a video on a phone or
Right.
a direct mail piece or whatever. It's like you are engaging all five senses along that. Yeah. So then you take people from this space into and actually, for folks that are watching the video version of this, that scene behind you is not a fake background. That is the space.
Yeah.
And so, just kind of bring it home for me, kind of as you move from problem to solution to action.
Yeah. So when you exit your Ugandan walk, you walk out and you engage with both the science and art of dirty water. We have beakers and slides and videos to show you what we're battling against. It is the bacteria. It is the issues in their water that are making them sick. And then we have an entire art wall that is dirty water. That a local artist created all of the colors of dirty water around the world, backlit against an incredibly beautiful space. And it's the most photographed place, but it is also the most destructive space because it represents all of what people around the world are drinking. So when we finish, that's unpacking the problem. And then the space right behind me, you see the yellow pipes that are just to above my head and to the side of my head. That's our solutions area. So we make a turn to that to help people understand. Now we can teach you that we can solve this problem. And the whole solutions area is about engaging with the solutions that exist around the world to bring water to communities. We talk about our local partners and that we only work with indigenous local partners around the world, but then we allow them to dive into some of that. We actually built out a biosand filter that sits in this space. We have a drilling rig component that has all the buttons from a drilling rig in Ethiopia that kids can play with that fire up the pipes behind me. There are videos that teach them about each of the solutions that play on a large table in the middle of the solutions area. So we let people engage then with solving the problem. And in this point of the story, it's still about our family, but it's really about the technical side of the problem. How do we solve it? What solutions exist? What's the difference between a biosand filter and a drilled well with a hand pump and a pipe system? And helping people unpack some of that so that they understand on some level the technical ways that we solve it. And we go back to our story very quickly in a moment from there. But helping people engage with the how we solve it, I think, is important.
Mhm.
I think if we only tell a story, or if we only tell a story that leaves out the technical side, then we don't fully help them grasp what we're doing and how we're doing it in the world. And our local partners are such a big piece of that. We don't want to skip that part of this. So we move from there, and we go through a couple of different sections, but really the apex of the tour, and we know this from both conversations and surveys we do. The apex of the tour is a 7.5 minute virtual reality film with the other daughter in the family, and it is Grace. She's 10 years old. And so we see people slide on these virtual reality goggles. Many people my age, for the first time ever in their life, they look at them like they have no idea what's about to happen, but they slide them on. And again, it is transporting them from their space, from suburban world that we're standing in here in Franklin, to back to Uganda. But this time, a 10-year-old narrates the day that clean water shows up in their community, both the challenge of water and the celebration of water. And then she unlocks for them what life looks like now with clean water. She talks about not being late to school and having opportunities that she didn't have before. And it truly engages people with not just the emotion of what's happening, but the reality of what impact looks like. Because we can teach them technically how to solve it. But when you see it solved in one girl, one family, one community, it truly
Yeah.
changes everything.
And I love how you really are following one story, right? You're not sort of jump cutting, to use a, film term, from like,
Yeah.
there's this happening over here and there's this happening over here. And I would say, for a lot of nonprofit leaders listening, that shows incredible restraint, because it can be like, well, but you have to understand how big this issue is. And we need to tell lots of stories. But what you're doing is you're bringing the viewer, the person through, "Hey, this is what Grace and Esther's life is like. Let's walk a mile in their shoes. Let's see the kinds of water that they're being asked to drink. Let's see what the solution would be, the solution is in their community." And you're bringing them through that story, which I think is just so powerful.
Well, and I don't think we ever need to sell our donors short. Our donors realize that, I mean, we've served 21 million people at Charity Water. And Grace and Esther, while a very real and true story, are also a representative story. They understand that there's a Grace and Esther in India, and they understand there's a Grace and Esther in Honduras. Our donors understand
Yeah.
that, and so when we try to over explain, um, I think we do lose people. We lose, at the very least, we lose the connective um, tissue that drives them through a story from beginning to end by trying to tell them too many things.
Yeah, so that's a perfect bridge to action. You have this VR film, and I would say, and one of the things you and I talked about is you do you do kind of let people really move through this experience at a pretty decent pace, right? You're not really
Yeah.
sort of dragging out you got to spend 20 minutes at this station and 20 minutes at that station. It's like you keep people moving at a pretty good pace. But then you get down to the action section and you really slow down at that point. Talk a little bit about what that looks like and kind of the psychology of that.
Yeah, so one of the things we're trying to accomplish in the space, and I would go back and say, talking about the story piece, um, we're 1 year old and we've done well. We have so much to learn. We're actually working with a consultant now on making that story even better, more effective, making sure we're telling the right thing. So I think always as fundraisers, we always, even when things are going well, we need to go back and reassess. How can we be better? How can we be better? And so one of the things we're trying to accomplish is the social science of narrative transportation, which is just simply the idea of pulling somebody out of their own story and putting them so deep in somebody else's story that you are literally making their neural pathways change to a point where they feel so immersed in a story that empathy becomes greater, that connection becomes greater. Again, not by manipulation, but just by connection. And so for us, narrative transportation is the goal so that they feel so immersed in Grace and Esther's story that they can't help but to see their own story. They can't help but to see their own role in that story without having to call them out as one of the things you have to be very careful out, especially in global nonprofits, is making the donor the hero. And everybody that's willing to give is should always be praised for it. But there is some level of you don't want to always be about I'm the hero saving the world, saving these people, but you want them connected enough to see themselves in the story, so that when you get to the action point, so we land at what we call the give shop. It is without seeing a photo of it, the first time it was explained to me, I'm not sure I had a positive look on my face. It is essentially three giant vending machines, painted in three different colors that are about 10 feet tall each, with our three ways that people can engage with us financially. And when it was first explained to me on week one of the job, I
Like
thought,
giving vending
no,
machines. Yeah.
no way. And it is so well done. It is so engaging visually and so engaging from a connecting standpoint and so clear. So from left to right at our give shop, people understand that we have donors who pay all of our overhead. And so those people are called the well. $100,000 a year. We have pictures of them. We have an iPad with videos. Then we move from there to people who choose to do an entire community. So a $10,000 commitment for an entire water project. People that just watched Grace get water in her community in Uganda who say, I want to do what I just saw. And they commit $10,000 through that box. And then the third box is a box for our monthly giving program called the Spring. Currently at 50,000 donors in the spring. And this is the one when we do public tours, which we do every weekend that are free. This is the one we see the most engaged with because they're families and most of them for the first time. It is the first philanthropic gift they've done as a family. And so that monthly giving on ramp is such an important piece for them. And so that is another way that they can engage. And so we walk them through those three options. And again, know who's on your tour, which is one of the ways I train all of my tour guides. Know who's on your tour so that you know really who you're speaking to at the give shop. If it's a family, let's spend more time on monthly giving. If it's a major donor, let's spend more time on the two boxes that have the 10,000 or the $100,000 gift. If it's a company, we know what we want out of them. So it is in any fundraising scenario, you should always know who your audience is. And so we should know as we're giving a tour, what are we truly landing on at the give shop? And we tell people all the time, we solve the world's water crisis when people like us do something about it. And so we challenge them that there's something is right there in the give shop, and it's their choice to make as to what that is.
Yeah. Well, and the thing I appreciated having gone through it is it's not heavy-handed, but it is clear. And number one, by starting with talking about the well, people who understand charity water know that, if you're a donor, a general donor to charity water, 100% of your contribution goes to the
Yeah.
field because the generous donors have covered essentially the operation. So I think that's smart. But also you just give people space. And I think this is a mistake I see nonprofit leaders make especially in live events where they sort of rush to the ask and they say, anyone want to give? Okay. And no, okay, we're moving on, kind of a deal. There's kind of that attitude. So, what happens psychologically when people are given space instead of pressure?
Yeah, I think it honors them. Like I think there when you give pressure or speed, you've done one of two things. Like you are trying to make the decision for them instead of letting them make the decision. That's why you just keep going on and giving more pressure and being heavy handed because you're trying to force the decision. And people revolt against that. I mean, we started as young children revolting against that when we were told what to do. People just don't engage that way. The other mistake we make is trying to go so fast and then making sure we give everybody an out if they don't feel like giving, and we verbalize all those outs. And so I have a lot of young fundraisers on my team, and they're so good at what they do. But one of the learnings is, hey, it's okay to land with what you want them to do and make a clear ask of what you want them to do next. Like one of the things I learned early on, the Heath brothers are so good with this and Made to Stick. So if any of the
Highly
listeners have not
recommend.
read Made to Stick,
Great book.
greatest
Great
book.
book.
Yeah, and one of the things they say is you assume people know what to do next, and they don't. And so when applied to fundraising, don't assume that they know the next steps that you want them to take. And so we try to be very clear, like, if you are so moved today, here's exactly how you sign up. Here's what you do next. Here's how you do it. Here's how we can help, which sounds so elementary, but we skip it in fundraising so often. And it's one of the things in my 20 years of training presenters, both at Compassion and at Charity Water, you have to make sure that you ask and tell your audience what you want them to do next. And so the gift shop for us is about slowing down, being authentic in our ask, and being clear in what we want them to do next.
Yeah. And remind me, there is some when they actually do sign up, do they get something? How does that work? Like in terms of just
Yeah, it's a we create a couple of fun, kind of tangible ways to celebrate. So if somebody comes in and they join the spring, so that's our monthly giving. The spring has a two glass doors on the front of it with clear cups, and half of them are empty and half of them have water in it. And what happens is if somebody joins the spring, they take one of the empty cups. We have a water dispenser built in to my beautiful vending machine. We have a water dispenser where they fill up their cup of water to represent the commitment they just made as an individual. And then they put it up on one of the top two shelves with other cups that are already filled to represent the movement that they're joining. Because all of those cups were filled by people that came through on previous tours. And it's a visual of what they just did and what they are joining. So just a fun way. And so it sounds so simple, but what we see every single weekend is people taking videos and pictures as their family is doing that, as their kids are filling it up. And it's just it's one of those things as a reminder that celebration is a key component of fundraising. People want to celebrate. They want to they want to mark their gift. And so coming up with small ways to do it. So if somebody does the next box over, the water project, to represent drilling for water. So they're doing an entire community, entire water project to represent drilling for water. We actually have a drill and then a board with different countries on it. And then they would choose their country, take that drill and drill into the board. And then we put a yellow dot over their spot that they've drilled to represent what they've done. So now we have an entire board full of yellow dots for people that have come in and done $10,000 at a time. And again, individual commitment, community that they've joined of people that are moving to change the world and getting rid of the water crisis.
over the past few years, as we've worked with dozens of organizations to grow sustainable recurring giving, I keep hearing the same thing from leaders. They don't just want tactics, they want community. They want to know that they're not doing this alone. And for some teams, they're not quite ready for our sustainable giving deep dive accelerator, but they are ready for something more accessible, something that helps equip them, not just one person, but their whole team. That's exactly why we created RISE. RISE is a new implementation-focused group advisory program designed to help organizations grow recurring giving that actually lasts. It's a place where we turn insights into action, and then action turns into momentum. Inside our RISE program, you'll get live group advisory calls, office hours with me, ongoing education and training, access to guest experts, and a private community where you can ask questions, share ideas, and learn from peers who are wrestling with the same challenges you are. You'll also have access to our advisory team, so when you're stuck, unsure, or deciding what to try next, you're not guessing alone. Here's the heart of it: you don't have to grow sustainable giving on your own. Rise is where leaders grow recurring giving together with guidance, accountability, and forward momentum. Enrollment is open now, and if this sounds like something your organization or your team needs, I would love for you to learn more or raise your hand. You can visit sustainablegiving.org/rise to explore the program or to express interest. We'd love to have you grow with us. Again, that's sustainablegiving.org/rise to sign up or let us know that you're interested. Looking forward to seeing you in the program. I love the physicality of it. I love the tangibility of it. I love the visual. One of the things when we talk to clients, Brian, about how do you help people, especially in an open house environment or at the gala or whatever, like how do you help people to visualize what's happening? Particularly, there's a social kind of proof element to that as well. Like those cups up top that are filled with clean water, those are other families. Those are other individuals that have stepped up and made a difference. I've got people are watching the video feed. I've got a little bucket right over my a little
Yeah.
charity water bucket.
And I can
My
tell you a
floor.
little bit about those too, because that is a charity water from day one. If you go back and read the history of charity water, it is so key to get kids and families involved. From day one, it happened.
Mhm.
And so we have these jerry cans, which are the yellow cans that people carry water in around the world. We have 3D printed jerry can piggy banks that people can get from us. They give a donation, they get to take home the piggy bank, and then, I mean, you're far away from the lab, but if let's say you were local, you and your family fill that up, you bring it back to the lab. We keep a running tally of all the kids' money that gets returned to us. We celebrate every child that comes through. They get some free ice cream from the Jenny's ice cream downstairs, like just a way to celebrate. Because kids are doing and giving sacrificially. Because you know what? $20, $30 for a kid might be five or $10,000 for us and what they're doing and how they're doing it. And so we want to make sure that every one of those is celebrated.
So good. Well, and it's just again, you take the time for people to be able to take that action. And there's one more scene since we've kind of gone through the whole space. There's one more scene
Yeah.
I want you to cover before I have some other questions for you.
So the last space in the entire experience lab is back to, if you think back to how I explained it at the beginning, we have glass across all of the front facade, and one piece of that glass is an entire video that runs nonstop as people are going through. But behind that video wall is a small room that actually has a working water pump in it that looks exactly the same as people just watched in the virtual reality film with Grace. It literally is from the same company. So it is an exact model that you just saw in your virtual reality film. And so we enter into that room really essentially, there's no more real teaching going on. It is a celebration of what we now learned. And so everybody gets to pump water. And so that pump actually works. And when they go to pump water, you think I'm just going to see water come out. And they do see water come out. But when it starts to come out, it also triggers cheering that we have in surround sound in that room from a community in Africa that are cheering you on as you pump for water. And then that video wall goes from the promo video to a animated graphic of water filling up all across that video wall, where everybody again down in the grand hall can look up and see. Again, just multi-sensory to engage people with celebration, with engagement, with what they've learned, and a little bit of surprise. Like that's one of the things you always want to take somebody. We talked about it early on in the conversation. Take somebody where they didn't think they were going.
Yeah.
Great storytelling. Take somebody where they didn't think they were going. When you take a turn, any author, speaker, writer, you take a turn that people didn't see coming, that's when you have them. And so we've tried to put some of those moments throughout the experience lab as aha walk away moments that people talk about.
And even when you started to describe that, I had goosebumps because I can remember that moment when I was like, "Oh, water's gonna come out, yay!" But then you hear the cheer. This just you're surrounded by a village of people,
Yeah.
and again, back to the little kids downstairs who are like, "What's going on up there?" They see this group of people, and they see this water graphic and they can tell something's going on,
Yeah.
something fun's going on up there. I love it. Well, let's talk. Let's kind of break down some of this because, and I'd love for you to draw in. You mentioned compassion. You worked for many years in live events. You didn't have a fixed, space with, sort of
Yeah.
the kind of physical, but you still created physical environments. And so, let's talk about what have you seen in terms of moving people into recurring giving because that's obviously a common denominator, whether it's a compassion tour event
Yeah.
or the experience lab. Certainly for some reason, this idea of people being willing to step up, not just with a single, yeah, I'll give you a tip, but I will actually commit on a monthly basis to support the cause. What have you seen in terms of people moving into recurring giving, both, at the lab, but also just step back from that and just talk about that in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think over my career, I've seen it occur in multiple facets. I think when people, again, going back to narrative transportation, before I ever really knew that that was even a social science that had been studied and looked at, it's still the same concept. When people see themselves in the story, or see their role in the story, that's when people are moved to do something consistently. When people are guilted into something, they're more likely to give one time or to join and then cancel. But when they see themselves in the story or their role in the story, I think they're moved to say, you know what, this is something I want as part of my giving DNA. When I set my budget every month, I want this to be a priority the same way I prioritize my coffee or prioritize my mortgage or prioritize my kids. Like this is part of who I am. And I don't think that occurs until you draw people in on that level.
Mhm.
The best presenters that we had at Compassion in the live event space, again, they didn't have a 60-minute guided tour. They had 7 or 8 minutes in a concert when somebody really just wanted to go to the bathroom or get a drink for intermission. They had 7 or 8 minutes to grab them and keep them. And they did this typically by telling them great stories, by visualizing those stories through videos and photos, by personalizing those stories, by being in those spaces before they showed up at the concert. And so, um, I think when a mom or a dad sees themselves in the story of a family fighting in poverty to feed their kids, they're moved beyond just, "I'll give you a few dollars one time to get you to stop or to make myself feel
Mm.
appeased." And so I think there really is something to the idea of that narrative transportation of taking somebody so deep into a story. And so I think it goes to, if you're a nonprofit or if you're a presenter or you're a speaker or a writer, how do you take people deeply into a story? Like, how do you get them there? Instead of just giving them the technical or the statistical data that you feel is important. And I think we get so buried in that data because it is important. Like I've got numbers right now in my head that are so important about the water crisis. Like literally life and death numbers, but that's not going to embed you in the story. That might shock you, but it's not going to take you into the story. So, and I guess the question then is, how do we do both?
Mhm.
How do we tell them a story while introducing some of the important things we need them to take home with them?
Yeah. When you think about this, even just, for a listener today who's thinking, okay, I've got my gala next week, or I'm going to have that donor meeting, or we are working on maybe they are going to do some sort of live event, an open house, right? What would be your advice to them as they think about um, pulling something like that together?
Yeah, one of the great joys of this job in the last year of being open is that so many nonprofit friends have come through
Mhm.
from large and small nonprofits to see the space, to get inspired of what it could look like in their context. And one of the things I say to every single one of them, regardless of budget or size or resources, is every one of you has a story. Every one of you has a person or a result that is unbelievable because of the work you're doing, all important work. You've got a story. So now, how do you take that and put it in an element like a gala or an open house that engages a donor in a way that's not just turning on a video? to tell that story in maybe a 2D way?
Mhm.
Like, what are ways that you could break that story up and put it into sections or into exhibits? Or is there a way that that story gets told in a VR setting, or in an engaged setting where people are interacting with the story, not just listening? And so take your story and maximize it. And again, maybe you don't have the resources to build out a lab in the factory, but we all have the ability to tell our story in a different way, than just the ways we've been telling them over and over again.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's really powerful. And I want to kind of bridge a little bit because one of the other areas that you've had a lot of experience with, certainly a compassion, but also in some ways with Charity Water with Scott and his story. Scott Harrison, by the way, the founder of Charity Water, for the people who are wondering who we keep referring to. So you've worked deeply with artists and influencers. What role do you see them playing? What do they do that organizations can't do alone?
Yeah, I think it's evolved. It's so interesting that when I first started at Compassion, I started on the artist relations team. My job was literally to find an artist, to get them to sign up with us, take us on your tour, give us 5 to 10 minutes on your stage, and hopefully I can train you in a way that's going to move people to do something about it. And I think what we learned even back then is that you cannot underestimate the role that trust plays in people making a decision to give to your mission. And so for Charity Water, Scott is a big piece of that. I mean, he speaks, he has a New York Times bestseller book about his life and starting Charity Water. He has built trust with people through multiple platforms in multiple ways. But I think influencers and artists, and for faith-based organizations, pastors, the people that other people trust. And so not every influencer works, not every artist works. But if you've got one that is trusted by its people, that is trusted, that gives messaging about giving and making the world a better place, they can be so effective in getting your word out, and amplifying your word to people, because they're going to trust that influencer first.
Mhm.
And then they're going to hopefully trust your organization because the influencer they trust also trusts your organization. And I do think there's power in that. And I think um, the vast amount of influencers now has watered down some of that power. But when you look at, and I'll use him as an example because he's done work with both Charity Water and Compassion, is Carlos Whitaker. So anybody that follows Carlos Whitaker on socials, in a world where there's so much noise, he doesn't have the largest following of influencers. He's got a large following, but it's not in the millions. But it's a following that is looking to make the world a better place.
Yeah.
And so when you can find those types of partners that have already gathered tribes of people together that are truly trying to put positive things into the world, it is more likely you're going to build that trust and you're going to have action come out of that. At Compassion, I've led an entire digital influencer launch back post COVID. So we were trying to look at different ways post COVID, and we took one of our very first trips of testing this. We took an influencer to Africa who had multiple millions of followers, but this influencer was in the food realm, was faith-based, so it fit Compassion well, and we did a phenomenal trip, and this person did a great job telling Compassion's story. Beautiful imagery, beautiful videos, and at the end of the trip, we got 5 kids sponsored. And 5 kids, I mean, that is the first few minutes of an intermission at a concert.
Mm.
And so that is not a lot for an entire trip. And what we really learned, it wasn't that the influencer didn't care or did a poor job. It was that the audience was so detached from what we were asking the audience to do that there was too big of a gap to jump. And so just because somebody has a massive following doesn't mean they're going to work for your organization or your mission. So when we started a year or two later, honing in on smaller influencers who had a more nuanced following around giving and philanthropy and like human-minded ideas,
Mhm.
we started seeing the numbers go up and up and up when we would engage with that. And so I think that's for nonprofits that are looking to work in that space, I think that's an important distinction. Bigger is not better. It really depends on who they are and what their audience is trained to do.
Yeah. There's a lot of wisdom in that. And for a space that's certainly been around for, I mean, influence has been around as long as human beings,
Right.
but it's an interesting space to see today. But I love it when I see influencers, really use that for good. And there is something again about oftentimes an influencer is correlated with a in-person environment because it's a concert, it's a
Yeah.
show, it's a whatever. But for back to, kind of circling back, and we could just keep going, man, because I love for anybody who's heard me think about these spaces and places that we can create. Um, there's stuff we could talk about in terms of just like throughput and how many people. And okay, you mentioned, and I'm sure astute fundraisers would have heard, this is not just a for recurring giving or for single gifts. This is also for their major donors and mega donors, and really bringing people into a space that really serves all of them, which is quite a feat.
Yeah. And is honestly fun because again, you do second or third graders in the morning and a CEO in the afternoon, and your day was not boring.
Yeah,
Like and the space moved both of them.
yeah.
Like the second graders and the CEO both played with the kinetic sand that's in the solutions area. And so that to me, that's one of the greatest human connections of going, oh yeah, 10 years old or 60 years old, you're still connecting in some of the same ways regardless of age.
Well, what I want our listeners, especially nonprofit leaders, to think about, number one, go to Franklin, Tennessee and check it out. Super cool. But I also want them to think you don't have to, and you've said it multiple times, you don't have to create a museum level, themed entertainment,
Yeah.
space to create an immersive donor experience. So what's something that you would say to leaders listening today? They can start smaller than they think. What's a small but meaningful way to create a more immersive donor experience?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say one of the mid-level ways to do it would be, any kind of video format that transports people to, where you wanna take them. So while virtual reality can be expensive, it doesn't have to be expensive, like, all of our headsets were donated, and most of what we filmed was internal. But even then, it doesn't have to be as expansive as we did it. I think when you're looking for the idea of what could stand alone or take people out of their space, if there's a way to do some level of virtual reality storytelling, it is the most effective thing we do. Our major gift donors take our headsets and sit in people's homes
Hmm.
and slide them onto them, because we see it nonstop being effective in all levels. And so I think that's a really clear one, that people can do. And then I think beyond just kind of the video side, how can you make your story, your mission visual? So I even when I think about how we took what we're battling against in the bacteria and parasites that make water dirty and put it into an interactive science
Hmm.
exhibit, and the art exhibit. Those when I go and do conferences and speak at conferences, a lot of times I'll just grab 10 glasses off of my dirty water wall and take them with me and set them out. Because again, you made your mission visual.
Yeah.
When you can do that and add it to everything else you're already doing, I think that does take that first step into the immersive world.
Well, make your mission visual. I love that. And a lot of times, organizations get caught up in the methods or the sort of their model. Like we drill poles, or we build radio towers, or we whatever the infrastructure is. But what you're also saying, or what I'm hearing, is also find a way to make the actual outcomes visual, right? And don't just start with the solution, right? Start with the problem, move to the solution, and then ask people to take action. So helpful.
Yeah, and I would say add to that just again, as you're starting to formulate your stories and how you want to do this. This was my message of compassion. It was already in the DNA here at Charity Water. The story is not about the organization. So don't make your stories about your organization. Make your organization the response to the need. So let me illustrate that and how we do it in the lab. The experience lab, I don't know what percentage I would call it, but probably 80% of the experience lab is not about charity water. It is about the water crisis. Even though Scott's story about founding Charity Water is highly compelling, We spend a little bit of time on it in the video. We have a few different spaces where it's referenced, but the lab itself is about the water crisis. It is about engaging people with the need, with the families, with this specific family that has that need. It is not about reminding you how good we are throughout the space. Then at the end of the space, we become the response to what you were just moved by. So I think we just all need to remember when we start to tell stories, the mission, the core of what we do is the core of the story. We are not the core of the story. We're the response to help make that mission magnified in the world.
So good. Well, and Brian, one, I'm so grateful that you are investing who you are and your experience and your just background, right, into this space, which is awesome. But I also am just grateful to the entire team at Charity Water and the investment you've all made in this sector. I told you this when we were together, and for readers of my book, will know this. It was man, going on 4 years ago. I was like, man, somebody needs to write a book about what's happening in the sustainable giving space and how the subscription economy has started to really change things and made this more possible. And I was stuck. I was like, man, I've written a lot of words in this life, but I've not written a book. And I am so intimidated. I don't know, how to really get started. And I was talking to a friend of mine. His name's Peter Greer. He's the CEO of Hope International. And he's written 12 or 14 books by now. And so Peter's such a gracious leader, and he gave me some advice that really was an unlock for me. But a reason I mentioned his story is because he also told me the story of a nonprofit conference he was at with a fellow leader, and this other leader was saying to him, "Man, January 1st is the worst day of the year." And Peter was like, "What do you mean? January 1st is the worst day of the year." And this leader went on to explain, well, every year I get to December 31st, we hit our budget, we miss our budget, whatever, like whatever happens, we've worked our tail off to get to December 31st. January 1st rolls around and here we are again, back at bottom of the mountain, right?
Yeah.
And that really stuck with Peter. And a few years later, he saw that leader again at another conference, and they were talking, and the other leader said, "We solved it. Like we figured it, we fixed it." And he was like, "Fixed what? What do you mean?" He said, "The January 1st problem." And he was like, "What? What do you mean you fixed the January 1st problem?" And this leader, other leader, by the way, whose name was Scott Harrison, at Charity Water, was the one that said, "Hey, we created the spring. We've invested. We've gone all in on recurring sustainable giving for our organization, to the tune now of what you said earlier today of 50,000 people who are standing with the organization and with the cause on a recurring monthly basis,
Yeah.
making a difference." And so I love that Charity Water really saw that in a time in history where relief charities like them were not really doing much with recurring giving. You and I, Brian, have worked with organizations that have membership or sponsorship or, recurring giving's not new. It's been around for thousands of years. But the reality is the vast majority, three-quarters of charities have been left behind when it comes to growing resilient recurring giving programs. And thanks to enterprising leaders who saw some change in the winds, about a decade ago, we're now seeing people take advantage of that. So thank you, not only for the inspiration of your story and what you're doing with the lab. And I highly recommend if you get to the Nashville area, go to Franklin, look up the Experience Lab, and absolutely check it out.
Yeah, we'd love to have you. And that's families, individuals, teams, like we will show anybody and everybody around the lab, and we love to do it.
Yeah, and get some ice cream. It's a good ice cream, good coffee nearby. So you got that too.
Yeah.
Brian, thank you for joining us today. Before I have one more question for you, but before we let you go, where can people find you? Where can they find the Experience Lab if they're interested in learning more?
Yeah, charitywater.org/experience is really our hub. We're the Experience Lab on Instagram, at Charity Water on Instagram. Kind of we cross over with both of those. And then for me personally, at Brian Seay on Instagram or LinkedIn, are the two places I live the most. And so would love if you've got thoughts, somebody who's listening have thoughts or want to come visit, reach out to me and let's set that up.
Love it. Love it. Thanks, Brian. Okay, so one last question for you. When you think about generosity in the future, what gives you hope?
Yeah. So it's Hudson, honestly, and we talk about Hudson in our lab experience, and because Hudson represents the next generation of what happens when somebody learns about a problem and does something about it. So Hudson was an 11-year-old boy that came through the lab with his family. We actually weren't even open. We were doing preview tours to get feedback. And Hudson came through and took a piggy bank like Dave's got over his shoulder. And when his family went to lunch, he told his family, I don't want to do the piggy bank. I want to do the $10,000. 11 years old. And so wisdom that emanated out of these parents, I'm not sure I raised 6 kids, and I'm not sure I was consistently wise like this. But instead of saying as parents, choose something more reasonable, or you're 11, where you're going to get $10,000, they just said, what's your plan? And so Hudson, for 4 months, spent time started with his grandparents, which is a good place to start, but went to door in his neighborhood, went to Sunday school classes in his church, just asked anybody and everybody he could find if they would give to his $10,000 goal. And it took him 4 months. It's not like somebody wrote him a $10,000 check on day 2 and he nailed it and turned it back in. It took him 4 months of persistence. And I think that's where the story really takes hold for me. And so at the end of that 4 months also coincided with our launch of the Experience Lab. And so we invited Hudson to join us on opening night. And Scott told his story to everybody that was packed into the lab and asked Hudson if he had something for him. And so Hudson, standing on a desk that was turned into a stage, standing on that stage, all dressed up, ready to go, reaches into his back pocket and has an envelope of $10,000 in cash and checks in it and hands it to Scott so that a Ugandan water well in a community could be built for an entire community. Because one boy came through, saw the lab, said, I can do something about it. The hope I get is because not only do we have one boy that has a great story that we tell nonstop at the lab, but to watch kids that hear Hudson's story on a daily basis then go, give me that piggy bank, or I'm going to go do $10,000. That's where I understand that education and planting seeds is the hope of generosity in the future. So when we do a second grade field trip, one of the things I tell every field trip, they're not going to give us $10,000. If they do, great. But a second grade field trip isn't going to hand us over. But what I tell every kid that comes through on a field trip is don't wait until you're old to do something to make the world a better place. And so when people are learning that early on, we're going to see humans grow into adults, tiny humans grow into adults and do great things. That's where my hope comes from, is just seeing that day in and day out in the lab happen with kids and families.
I love that. Well, and as a dad and as somebody who thinks deeply about generosity and how do we inspire the next generation, I hear. I love that. I love Hudson's story. Good job, Hudson. Awesome. Well, thank you, Brian. Again, thanks for joining us today. I love this conversation, and I just really think that as leaders, we need to think about how can we design experiences that don't just move people emotionally, but actually move them into sustained long-term generosity. And so just appreciate what you're doing, and I hope our listeners have really benefited from our conversation today. Thanks, man.
Glad to do it. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Sustainable Giving Podcast. I hope you found the information helpful and that you're able to walk away with insights that you can use to start building a steady stream of recurring revenue for your organization. For even more resources to help you build a thriving recurring giving program, go online to sustainablegiving.org. That's sustainablegiving.org. And lastly, if a leader comes to mind that you think would benefit from this episode, would you do me a favor? Would you share this episode with them? Just that little act could be the difference they need to start growing sustainable recurring giving for their own organization. Until next time, thanks for joining us.